She was married, until a routine checkup made her question everything, and fall for the woman she never expected. Elena learned early how to be agreeable. It wasn't taught outright, no one sat her down and explained it, but it lived in the small things, the way her mother smoothed conflict before it surfaced, the way women around her praised endurance as if it were virtue. Elena absorbed it quietly. She became good at making space for others, even when she wasn't sure who she was making space from. By the time she married Mark, she believed love was something that settled. Something that softened into habit. Mark was safe. Thoughtful. He asked before touching her, remembered her coffee order, kissed her forehead before leaving for work. Their life unfolded predictably: Sunday grocery runs, muted arguments about nothing important, shared Netflix shows they both half-watched. People said, "You're lucky." Elena nodded and smiled. What she didn't have language for was the absence. The way desire felt theoretical. The way intimacy felt like participation rather than hunger. She assumed this was adulthood. That passion was for films, for younger women, for people who made reckless choices. At night, lying beside Mark, she sometimes felt a strange ache, not for another man, not even for a specific person. Just, elsewhere. As though something in her was facing the wrong direction. When the chest tightness began, she blamed stress. The GP's surgery smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. Elena checked in at reception, sat between a coughing man and a woman scrolling aggressively on her phone, and rehearsed what she would say. "It's probably nothing. I've just been tired. Work's been busy." When her name was called, she followed the voice down the corridor, expecting someone older. Someone brisk. Instead, the doctor who stood to greet her looked present. "Elena?" she asked, smiling politely. "I'm Dr. Lawson. Please, come in." The room was small but warm. Not overly clinical. A plant sat near the window, slightly neglected but alive. Dr. Mira Lawson washed her hands, then turned, not rushing, not already typing. "So," she said, sitting. "What's been going on?" Elena opened her mouth. The usual answers waited, ready to perform. But something about the way Mira looked at her, attentive without pressure, made her pause. "I don't feel right," Elena said finally. Mira nodded. "Tell me more." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was spacious. Elena talked about the tightness. The fatigue. The sense of being disconnected from her own body. Mira asked careful questions, listened fully, didn't interrupt with assumptions. When their eyes met, Elena felt something unfamiliar, not attraction exactly, but recognition. As though she were being seen without explanation. "We'll run some tests," Mira said gently. "But we'll also talk. Sometimes the body holds things the mind hasn't named yet." Elena left with a referral slip in her hand and a strange feeling in her chest, not tightness. Awareness. The tests came back normal. Perfect, even. Mira delivered the results with professional calm, then leaned back slightly in her chair. "How are you sleeping?" "Not well." "Dreams?" Elena hesitated. "Yes." Mira waited. "They don't make sense," Elena added. "Just feelings." "Feelings usually do," Mira said quietly. Each appointment stretched just a little longer than necessary, not because Mira crossed boundaries, but because she allowed space. She asked questions Elena hadn't known were permitted in medical rooms. "Do you feel connected to your life? When did you last feel excited? Is there anything you're afraid to say out loud?" Elena started leaving the surgery unsettled, her thoughts trailing behind her like loose threads. At home, Mark noticed her distraction. "You all right?" he asked one evening. "Just tired," she said automatically. But that night, Elena lay awake replaying Myra's voice, not the words, but the tone. The steadiness. The absence of expectation. She realized something unsettling then. She felt more like herself in that small room with a woman she barely knew than she did in her own marriage. The realization frightened her. It began as a whisper. What if? She shut it down immediately. She wasn't unhappy. She wasn't dramatic. She was married to a good man. She didn't want women. Except, there were moments, looking back, that suddenly rearranged themselves. Her teenage fixation on a friend she swore was admiration. The way she avoided locker rooms, not from shame, but awareness. The way she had always watched women longer than men, without knowing why. During one appointment, Mira asked, "How is your relationship?" Elena laughed softly. "Stable." Mira smiled faintly. "That wasn't my question." The room felt warmer. "I think something's missing," Elena said. "But I don't know what." Mira studied her carefully, not clinically, but kindly. "Sometimes," she said, "we don't miss things. We miss parts of ourselves." The sentence lodged deep. That night, Elena stood in front of the bathroom mirror and said the words silently. "I might be attracted to women." Her reflection didn't flinch. She did. Elena told Mira during what should have been a routine follow-up. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. "I need to say something," Elena said. Mira closed the file and gave her full attention. "I think I'm gay," Elena whispered. "Or maybe I always have been." The air shifted. Mira didn't smile. Didn't react beyond a slow, thoughtful breath. "Thank you for trusting me with that," she said. Elena swallowed. "I'm married." "I know," Mira replied softly. There was something in her voice, careful, restrained, that made Elena's chest ache. "How do you feel about realizing this?" Mira asked. "Terrified," Elena said honestly. "Relieved." "Ashamed." "Like my life suddenly makes sense and completely falls apart at the same time." Mira nodded. "That's very common." Elena looked at her then, not as a doctor, not as a woman she admired, but as someone who felt possible. Nothing crossed between them. No touch. No look held too long. And yet Elena left knowing something irreversible had happened. She had told the truth. The change was subtle at first. Elena noticed it in the way Mira began to sit a fraction farther back, in how the pauses between their words grew more deliberate. Nothing cold. Nothing unkind. Just careful. It hurt more than Elena expected. She told herself that this was good. That this was how it should be. That professionalism was safety. Still, each appointment now carried a faint ache, like standing too close to something warm you weren't allowed to touch. Mira remained the same in all the ways that mattered, attentive, gentle, precise. But she no longer let the conversation wander as freely. When Elena drifted toward vulnerability, Mira guided her back with questions that had edges now. "How have your anxiety levels been? Any changes in appetite? Are you seeing a therapist?" Elena answered dutifully, though a quiet part of her longed for the earlier version of these meetings, when silence had felt shared rather than supervised. One afternoon, as Mira typed notes into the computer, Elena watched her reflection faintly in the screen. The slope of her cheekbone. The concentration in her brow. It startled Elena how intimate such ordinary observations felt. "You're doing that thing," Mira said gently, without looking up. Elena blinked. "What thing?" "Leaving your body," Mira replied, finally meeting her eyes. Elena flushed. "I'm sorry." "No need," Mira said. "But I want you to stay present. With yourself." There it was again, that way Mira seemed to know her too well, while refusing to step closer. After the appointment ended, Elena lingered in her seat. "Mira?" she asked, using her first name for the first time. Mira paused, hand on the door. She didn't correct her. "Yes? Have I made things uncomfortable?" The question came out smaller than Elena intended. Mira's expression softened, but her posture remained firm. "No. But clarity matters. For both of us. Elena nodded, throat tight. Right. That night, Elena lay awake replaying the word clarity. She thought about boundaries, the invisible lines people drew to keep themselves safe. She understood why Mira needed them. She respected them. But respect didn't quiet longing. The next visit was different. Mira didn't sit immediately. Instead, she remained standing for a moment, hands folded, eyes thoughtful. I want to talk about something, she said. Elena's stomach dropped. I've been reflecting on our conversations, Mira continued. And while I believe they've been helpful, I also want to ensure you're getting the right support. Elena's chest tightened. Are you saying I should see someone else? Mira hesitated, just long enough to be human. I think it would be best, she said finally. For you. The room felt suddenly smaller. Because I'm, like this? Elena asked quietly. No, Mira said immediately. Because you're becoming. The word echoed. Mira continued, voice steady but warm. You're in the middle of a significant realization. It's important you have a space where everything can be explored without complication. And this is complicated, Elena said, though she didn't mean accusation. Yes, Mira agreed softly. Elena swallowed. I understand. She didn't, not really. But she tried. As Mira printed the referral, Elena noticed her hands weren't shaking, but her jaw was tight. Controlled. As if she were holding something back. I want you to know, Mira said, passing over the paper, that nothing you've said has been inappropriate. And none of this is a rejection. Elena looked up. It feels like one. Mira met her gaze fully now, eyes honest. Sometimes, she said, the most respectful thing we can do is step away from what could blur the truth. The words landed heavy and precise. Elena nodded, forcing a small smile. Thank you. For everything. Mira smiled back, but there was sadness there now. Real. Unhidden. You're welcome, Elena. The door closed softly behind her. In the corridor, Elena stood still, referral paper creased in her hand, heart aching in a way she hadn't expected. She had not lost a lover. She had lost a possibility. And somehow, that hurt just as much. The house didn't change. That was what unsettled Elena most. The same pale light filtered through the kitchen window each morning. The kettle still whistled too loudly. Mark still kissed her cheek before work, his mouth warm and familiar in a way that now felt almost ceremonial. Nothing broke. Something shifted. Elena moved through her days with a new awareness, like a hairline crack running through glass, nearly invisible, but once noticed, impossible to unsee. She went to the new GP as recommended. The woman was competent, efficient, kind in the way professionals often were. She asked the right questions, offered therapy referrals, adjusted Elena's medication slightly. But there was no space. No pause long enough for truth to stretch. Elena complied, nodded, answered. She left each appointment feeling untouched. At night, she lay beside Mark, staring at the ceiling, replaying Myra's voice in her head, not what she had said, but what she had refused to say. That restraint had carved itself into Elena's memory more deeply than any confession could have. Mark noticed her distance in small ways first. You've been quiet lately, he said one evening as they ate dinner in companionable silence. Just tired, Elena replied. The lie came easily. It always had. But exhaustion implied effort, and Elena was tired of effort. Tired of folding herself neatly into a life that no longer fit. One Saturday morning, Mark reached for her in bed, his hand resting on her waist. She froze. Not dramatically. Not enough for him to notice immediately. Just a tightening, a pause that spoke volumes inside her. Hey, he murmured. You okay? Elena swallowed. Yeah. I'm just, not in the mood. He smiled, understanding. That's all right. And that was the problem. Mark was always all right. Weeks passed. The fracture widened, silently. Elena found herself watching women differently, on the street, in cafes, in reflections she caught by accident. It wasn't hunger, exactly. It was recognition. A sense of alignment she'd never felt before. She began therapy. The therapist was gentle, perceptive. Asked questions Elena had avoided her entire life. When did you first learn that desire could be ignored? She asked once. Elena didn't know how to answer. I think I thought it would go away, Elena said slowly. The night Elena told Mark came without ceremony. No raised voices. No shattered plates. Just truth, laid bare on the sofa they'd chosen together years ago. I need to tell you something, Elena said. Mark muted the television immediately. His brow furrowed, not with anger, but concern. What's wrong? Elena's hands trembled. She folded them together, then unfolded them again. I think I'm gay, she said. The words didn't echo the way she'd feared. They simply existed between them. Mark stared at the floor for a long moment. Are you saying you don't love me? He asked quietly. Elena's chest ached. I love you. Just, not in the way you deserve. He swallowed hard. Is there someone else? No, she said immediately. And then, after a pause, added, there was never anyone. Just, the realization. Mark leaned back, rubbing his face. How long have you known? I didn't, Elena said. Not like this. I think I've always known something was missing. I just didn't know what it was called. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Mark said, are you leaving? The question broke her. I don't know, Elena whispered. But I can't keep pretending. Mark nodded slowly, eyes wet. I wish you'd told me sooner. So do I, Elena said. They cried, not angrily, not accusingly. Just two people grieving a future that had felt certain until it wasn't. That night, they slept in the same bed, but something fundamental had changed. There was no longer an unspoken agreement to keep going as before. The fracture had reached the surface. In the days that followed, Elena felt both lighter and unbearably sad. Truth did that, it freed you, but it also demanded something in return. She thought of Mira then, unexpectedly. Of the way she had stepped back rather than step wrong. Of the respect that had felt like loss. Elena understood now. Some endings were not punishments. They were permissions. The decision did not arrive in a single moment. It unfolded slowly, through practical conversations and pauses heavy with things neither of them wanted to say. Elena and Mark learned how to talk differently, carefully, gently, as if the truth between them were fragile glass. They sat at the kitchen table one evening with mugs of tea gone cold. I don't want to hurt you, Elena said, staring into the cup. Mark nodded. I know. I never meant to lie. I know that too. Those words, I know, became a kind of mercy. They didn't erase the pain, but they softened its edges. They spoke about logistics before emotions because it was easier. About the spare room. About who would tell their families first. About the cat and whose routine she followed more closely. Somewhere in between, Mark said quietly, I keep wondering if I did something wrong. Elena reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. You didn't, she said firmly. This isn't about failure. It's about truth arriving late. Mark's eyes shone. I loved you the only way I knew how. I know, Elena said. And I loved you back. Just not with my whole self. That was the sentence that stayed with him. They decided to separate without spectacle. No lawyers at first. No accusations. Just space. Elena packed a suitcase and moved into the spare room while they figured out next steps. The house became quieter, not tense, just emptied of expectation. She noticed how differently she breathed when she was alone. For the first time in years, the tightness in her chest eased. That frightened her almost as much as it relieved her. She grieved in unexpected ways, catching herself about to share something with Mark, remembering a joke only he would understand, mourning a future that had been comfortable and kind. But beneath the grief was something new. Alignment. Telling their families was harder. Elena's mother cried, not from cruelty but confusion. "But you were happy," she said. "I was surviving," Elena replied gently. Friends responded in layers, some with awkward support, others with silence. A few surprised her with understanding she hadn't known they were capable of. Mark handled questions with quiet dignity. "She didn't betray me," he told people. "She found herself." Elena loved him for that. The paperwork followed, bank accounts, appointments, official endings that felt too small for the magnitude of what was happening. Through it all, Elena stayed in therapy. Learned how often she had overridden her own discomfort to keep others comfortable. "Who taught you that wanting less was noble?" her therapist asked. Elena didn't know. But she was unlearning. One afternoon, weeks later, Elena walked past the old GP's surgery without meaning to. Her feet slowed before her mind caught up. She didn't go in. She didn't need to. But she stood across the street for a moment, remembering the room where truth had first taken shape. She thought of Mira, not as the doctor now, but as the woman who had stepped back so Elena could step forward. There was no bitterness in the memory. Only gratitude. Elena turned and walked on, her steps light, uncertain, real. For the first time, she wasn't leaving because something was broken. She was leaving because something had begun. Elena expected loneliness to arrive like a wave. She imagined empty evenings stretching endlessly, silence pressing in on her chest. What she hadn't expected was how deliberate solitude felt, how intentional, how earned. She moved into a small flat on the edge of the city, light-filled but modest. The furniture was mismatched, borrowed or bought secondhand, chosen quickly but carefully. Every object felt temporary, and somehow that made the space feel honest. The first night alone, she sat on the floor with her back against the sofa, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the building. Someone laughed somewhere above her. A train hummed in the distance. She breathed. No one else's rhythms to follow. No one else's expectations to manage. Just her own. She began to notice herself. What music she liked when no one else was in the room. How she lingered over books written by women, stories she'd once avoided because they felt too close. The way her body responded, quietly, curiously, to the presence of women without the old surge of panic or denial. Desire no longer felt like something she had to justify. It simply existed. In therapy, Elena learned the language of her own boundaries. "You're not late," her therapist told her once. "You arrived when you were ready." Elena let that sentence settle into her bones. She and Mark learned how to be something new. Their conversations softened over time, becoming gentler, less weighted. They met for coffee occasionally, spoke about practical matters, shared updates without pretending nothing had changed. One afternoon, Mark said, "You look different." Elena smiled. "Better or worse?" "Truer," he said. She thanked him for that. He deserved her honesty as much as she did. Elena started volunteering at a local community arts center, something she'd always wanted to do but never felt she had time for. She met people without backstories attached, without shared history to perform against. There was a woman there, Claire, who laughed easily and flirted gently. Elena noticed, felt flattered, felt the faint spark of possibility. But she didn't rush. For the first time in her life, she understood that becoming herself wasn't a race. Some evenings, though, her thoughts still drifted to Mira. Not obsessively. Not painfully. Just, tenderly. She remembered the discipline of her kindness. The way she had protected Elena's truth by refusing to blur it. Elena realized then that love did not always begin with touch. Sometimes it began with restraint. Months passed. The seasons changed without asking permission. One afternoon in early spring, Elena walked into a cafe near the medical center she used to attend, not because she was thinking of Mira, but because she needed somewhere quiet to sit with a book. She ordered tea, found a corner table, opened her novel. And then... Elena? The voice was familiar enough to still her breath. She looked up. Mira stood there, coat over her arm, hair loose now, no badge, no white walls framing her. Just a woman, surprised and tentative and real. "Hi," Elena said, heart steady. Mira smiled slowly. "Hi." The room felt different without rules. Without roles. Mira gestured to the empty chair. "May I?" Elena nodded. "Please." They sat. No urgency. No fear. Just two women meeting again, whole, separate, and finally allowed to see what might happen next. They sat for a moment without speaking, as if both were adjusting to the unfamiliar freedom of it. No clipboard. No appointment time ticking away. No lines drawn in invisible ink between them. Just a small cafe, the low murmur of other conversations, and the quiet recognition that something once carefully contained had found its way back, changed, but still present. "How are you?" Mira asked first. Elena smiled. "I'm good. In a way that's new." Mira nodded, as if she understood exactly what that meant. "You look it." There was no professional neutrality in her voice now. No practiced distance. Only warmth, cautious but genuine. They talked easily at first, safe ground. Work. Books. The weather turning slowly kinder. Mira had moved practices. Elena mentioned the arts center, the flat, the way the city felt different when you walked through it alone for long enough. At some point, the conversation deepened without either of them noticing when it happened. "I worried about you," Mira admitted quietly. After the referral. Elena met her gaze. "I know. I could feel it." Mira exhaled, something like relief crossing her face. "I hoped you understood why I stepped back." "I do," Elena said. "It was the first time anyone chose my well-being over their own curiosity." Mira's eyes softened. "You were becoming yourself. I didn't want to interfere with that." There it was, the truth they had circled before, now allowed to land. Silence followed, but it wasn't heavy. It was spacious. Mira stirred her coffee absently. "Are you seeing anyone?" Elena smiled faintly. "No. I wanted to learn how to stand on my own first." Mira nodded, a hint of admiration in her expression. "That takes courage." "So does knowing when not to cross a line," Elena replied gently. Their eyes held. Something unspoken passed between them, not urgency, not longing sharpened by deprivation, but recognition that had matured into choice. "I'm no longer your doctor," Mira said quietly. "I know," Elena replied. "And you're no longer married." "Yes." Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to. Mira smiled then, slow and careful. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" Not a question born of impulse. Not charged with expectation. An invitation. Elena felt her chest warm, not tight, not anxious. Steady. "I'd like that," she said. They stood together outside the cafe a few minutes later. The city moved around them, unaware of the small, seismic shift taking place on the pavement. Mira hesitated, then asked, "May I hug you?" Elena nodded. The embrace was brief. Respectful. Yet Elena felt it settle somewhere deep, confirmation rather than ignition. As they stepped back, Mira smiled. "I'll text you." Elena laughed softly. "I look forward to it." They walked in opposite directions, glancing back only once. Not because they were afraid of losing each other. But because this time, they knew exactly where they stood. Dinner was not dramatic. That surprised Elena. She had imagined nerves sharp enough to cut, imagined every glance carrying weight, every pause stretching with expectation. Instead, the evening unfolded with an almost disarming gentleness, as if whatever urgency once existed between them had softened into something more durable. They chose a small restaurant neither of them had been to before. Neutral ground. Warm light. Tables close enough to feel intimate without being exposed. Mira arrived first, standing when Elena walked in. "You look beautiful," she said, without hesitation. Elena felt it, not a rush of heat, but a quiet certainty settling in her chest. "So do you." They laughed softly, the tension easing immediately. Conversation came easily. They spoke about food they loved, about places they had once thought they'd live, about the strange grief of letting go of versions of yourself that had never quite fit. At one point, Mira said, "I worried you might expect this to feel explosive." Elena smiled. "I think I've had enough explosions. I wanted something that could last." Mira met her gaze. "So did I." When dessert came, neither of them touched it right away. Mira studied her spoon for a moment, then looked up. "I want to say something, clearly." Elena nodded. "I'm interested in you," Mira said. "But only if we move at a pace that honors what you've just come through." Elena's throat tightened, not with fear, but gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "I don't want to rush either." They shared a smile that felt like agreement, not compromise. After dinner, they walked. The city had cooled, the air carrying the promise of spring. Streetlights cast long shadows, and their steps fell naturally into rhythm. At the corner where they would part, Mira slowed. "I've wanted to do this since the cafe," she said softly. "But I didn't want to assume." Elena stepped closer. "You're not." Mira lifted her hand, hesitated just long enough to be sure, then cupped Elena's cheek. The touch was gentle. Reverent. When their lips met, it was unhurried. Not consuming, not urgent, just real. Elena felt something settle into place, like a truth finally embodied. They separated slowly, foreheads resting together for a moment. "That felt right," Mira murmured. "Yes," Elena agreed. "It really did." Later, alone in her flat, Elena lay awake, not replaying the kiss, but the feeling that followed. Safety. Desire without fear. Connection without erasure. She thought of the woman she had been, the one who mistook endurance for love, silence for peace. She whispered quietly into the dark, "I'm here now." And for the first time, she believed it. They decided not to call it anything yet. No labels. No declarations. Just time, given freely, without pressure to turn into a promise before it was ready. They met in ordinary ways at first. Coffee after work. Long walks that wandered without destination. Quiet evenings on Myra's sofa, shoes kicked off, sharing a blanket and stories in pieces rather than wholes. Elena learned Mira in fragments. That she cooked instinctively, never following recipes. That she folded towels with unnecessary precision. That she paused before answering difficult questions, not from hesitation but from care. Mira learned Elena slowly too. How Elena filled silences with observation rather than noise. How she touched things gently, as if still asking permission. How laughter came easily now, but vulnerability still arrived in careful waves. They talked about boundaries openly. "I need to know," Elena said one evening, fingers wrapped around a mug, "that I'm not just catching up on lost time." Mira nodded. "And I need to know you're choosing this, not because it's new, but because it's true." Elena smiled. "I am." Intimacy grew quietly. It began with hands brushing, then resting. With shared glances that lingered a second longer than necessary. With nights that ended not in urgency, but in closeness, bodies learning each other's presence before asking for more. When they finally crossed that threshold, it was unhurried. They spoke first. "This is okay?" Mira asked. "Yes," Elena replied, steady and sure. Nothing in Elena's body tightened. Nothing pulled away. Desire arrived without fear this time, curious, present, deeply kind. Afterward, Elena rested her head against Myra's shoulder, feeling a peace she had once thought imaginary. I didn't know it could feel like this, she admitted. Myra kissed her hair. It often doesn't. Not unless you're allowed to be whole. There were still shadows. Elena sometimes flinched at sudden conflict. Myra sometimes retreated into quiet when overwhelmed. They named these moments instead of letting them fester. I'm not leaving, Myra said once, when Elena grew distant without meaning to. Elena breathed out slowly. I'm learning how not to disappear. That honesty became their rhythm. One afternoon, walking through a market hand in hand, Elena caught her reflection in a shop window. She almost didn't recognize herself. Her posture was different. Open. Unbraced. She squeezed Myra's hand. What? Myra asked, smiling. Nothing, Elena said. I just like who I am with you. Myra squeezed back. I like who you are, period. That night, lying beside Myra, Elena understood something quietly profound. This wasn't about discovering desire late. It was about finally trusting herself. The first time Elena introduced Myra as someone she was seeing, the words caught in her throat. Not because she was unsure, but because saying them aloud felt like stepping into sunlight without shielding her eyes. It happened at the Arts Center, on a quiet afternoon when the staff gathered for coffee after an exhibition opening. Someone asked casually, "Are you seeing anyone these days?" Elena paused, then said, "Yes. Her name is Myra." The moment passed without ceremony. A few smiles. A nod. Someone asked what Myra did for work. And just like that, the world didn't end. Elena walked home afterward with a lightness she hadn't anticipated. Visibility, she realized, wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it arrived as ease. With her family, it was harder. Her mother listened carefully, hands folded tight in her lap. Is this why your marriage ended? She asked. Yes, Elena said gently. And no. It ended because I wasn't living honestly. Her mother nodded slowly, grief and love sharing the same space on her face. I want you to be happy, she said. I just need time to understand. That's okay, Elena replied. I took time too. Her father hugged her longer than usual and said nothing at all. That was enough. Myra watched all of this with quiet respect. She never pushed Elena to come out faster, louder, or more completely than she was ready to. When Elena faltered, Myra remained steady, present without insisting. You don't owe anyone a performance, Myra told her once. Only the truth, at your own pace. Elena loved her for that. They argued for the first time on a rainy Tuesday evening. Nothing dramatic. Just a miscommunication about plans and a tired tone that landed harder than intended. Elena felt the familiar urge rise, to apologize too quickly, to smooth everything over before it could grow sharp. She stopped herself. I need a moment, she said instead. Not to leave. Just to think. Myra nodded. Take it. When Elena returned, her voice was steady. I'm not angry, she said. But I want us to talk when something feels off. Not pretend it doesn't matter. Myra smiled then, not because the conflict was resolved, but because it was real. That's how we'll last, she said. Love changed Elena in small, observable ways. She took up more space on sofas. She laughed louder. She no longer rehearsed sentences before speaking them. She learned that desire didn't make her selfish. It made her alive. One evening, lying tangled together, Myra traced slow patterns on Elena's arm. You know, Myra said, you don't apologize for wanting me anymore. Elena smiled, eyes closed. I don't think I ever should have. The world still had its complications. There were sideways glances. Old friends who drifted. Awkward questions framed as concern. But Elena no longer felt the need to shrink to survive them. She had crossed something irreversible. Not from straight to gay. Not from married to divorced. But from silent to spoken. And she wasn't going back. Elena hadn't expected the world to notice. It was subtle at first, a friend commenting on how often she smiled these days, a colleague asking if she was dating anyone, a neighbor spotting Myra's car in the driveway. Small ripples. Nothing dramatic. But ripples grow. At the art center, where Elena had volunteered for years, someone asked casually, "Are you serious about her?" Elena looked up from organizing the gallery wall. Mira was across the room, helping hang a photograph, unaware. "Yes," Elena said simply. "Her name is Mira. And yes, I'm serious." The sentence landed lightly, but firmly. The person nodded and walked away, but Elena felt a quiet triumph bloom inside her. Saying it aloud wasn't about proving anything to anyone, it was about claiming her own life. Even family began to adjust. Her mother asked to meet Mira over tea. They spoke carefully at first, circumspect, as though approaching a delicate sculpture. But Myra's gentle confidence, her ease with Elena, made the afternoon unfold naturally. "I can see why she makes you happy," her mother said finally, a small smile breaking across her face. "You've changed, in a good way." Elena felt her chest expand with relief. Approval was not necessary. But it was a comfort she hadn't expected to find. The world noticed in public spaces too. Holding hands, Elena felt the occasional glance, some curious, some judgmental, some fleetingly approving. At first, the awareness prickled. She remembered the years she had spent shrinking herself, softening edges to avoid attention. But now, it felt like armor rather than threat. Each look was a confirmation of presence. We exist. We are real. Mira squeezed her hand in crowded cafes. "We don't have to hide," she said quietly. "We can be ourselves. Even here." Elena nodded, watching their reflections in the window, two women side by side, mirrored in sunlight and glass. Even Mark noticed. Not with resentment. Not with judgment. But with understanding. He had moved into a quieter rhythm of his own life, but when Elena shared stories of her dates with Mira, or mentioned new things she was learning about herself, he listened with a calm smile. "She seems good for you," he said one afternoon, tossing a tennis ball to the cat. "She is," Elena said, finally saying the words aloud without hesitation. It felt like another kind of freedom. At night, Elena and Mira would lie together and talk about everything the world seemed to demand of them, expectations, judgments, history. "We've been quiet long enough," Mira said once, brushing hair from Elena's forehead. "It's time the world knows you're allowed to be happy." Elena smiled. "We've been learning to show it too." Slowly. Carefully. Mira kissed her gently, and the city hummed around them. The world noticed. And for the first time, Elena didn't care. Elena learned quickly that love was not always fireworks or perfect timing. Sometimes it was quieter, steadier, deeper, the kind that anchored you in ways you hadn't realized you were drifting. She and Mira had fallen into a rhythm that felt organic, each day layering trust over desire, honesty over fear. They shared small routines. Coffee at dawn, mugs warming their hands. Late-night walks where the city felt like it belonged to them alone. Books exchanged, pages dog-eared with notes and margins, as if each was leaving breadcrumbs into the other's mind. And yet, for all their comfort, they never stopped learning each other. Mira had quirks, her habit of humming when she cooked, the way she tilted her head when thinking hard, that Elena loved. Elena had patterns too, of retreating into silence when overwhelmed, of needing small spaces of solitude to recharge. Each time one revealed themselves, raw and unfiltered, it was met with patience, not judgment. Life threw small challenges. A work project that required long hours. Family gatherings with old friends still adjusting to change. Days when memories of her marriage pressed in, bittersweet and confusing. Through it all, they remained a team. We've been honest, Mira said one evening, brushing a loose strand of hair from Elena's face. Even when it scared us. That's what lasts. Elena nodded. She understood now that permanence wasn't in perfection. It was in choice. In showing up. In learning to love the small, ordinary moments as fiercely as the extraordinary ones. They traveled together, quietly exploring new cities, wandering streets where no one knew their past, only the story they were writing together. On a rooftop overlooking the ocean one evening, Mira held Elena's hand. I think this is what it's meant to feel like, Mira said softly. Elena's chest warmed. This is what love feels like when it's patient, she said. Mira kissed her slowly, deliberately, and for a long moment, neither spoke. They didn't need to. The quiet understanding between them carried more weight than words could hold. Elena reflected on her journey, the years of endurance, the quiet suppression, the tension between what was expected and what was true. She smiled softly. She had stepped through all of it, carrying nothing but honesty and the courage to choose herself. What lasted wasn't desire alone. It wasn't even the sweetness of discovery. It was trust. And love that had learned to wait. The night ended with them watching stars, heads together, hearts aligned, unspoken promises threading through the space between them. The world could notice. People could judge or admire. The past could linger. But they had each other. And in that, Elena finally understood, some things are meant to endure. The first morning of their new apartment, Elena woke to sunlight spilling across pale walls. She lay still, listening to Myra's even breathing beside her, and realized she had never felt so at home in her life. It wasn't the walls. It wasn't the furniture. It wasn't even the city outside, humming with movement and possibility. It was this, two lives converging gently, deliberately, without fear or apology. She turned to Mira and watched her stretch, hair loose, bare feet curling under the blanket. For a moment, Elena remembered every quiet moment that had led her here, the ache of pretending, the crackling tension in the doctor's office, the slow, difficult honesty with Mark, the long nights learning to breathe alone. Everything had mattered. Every choice had carved the path. Their life together was unremarkable in the most beautiful way. They cooked together, laughing at burnt edges and forgotten ingredients. They argued, sometimes sharply, sometimes silently, but always returned to understanding and compromise. They held hands on city walks, wandered quiet parks, discovered cafes tucked in corners that smelled like warm bread and possibility. Evenings were sacred, quiet talks, shared books, music spilling across soft rugs. Sometimes they did nothing at all, sitting in the same room, letting presence speak louder than words. Elena thought often of Myra's restraint, the patience that had allowed her to become herself before asking anything of her. That care had been love in its purest form, and Elena honored it every day. She also remembered the life she had left. Mark, kind and patient, who had loved her without conditions, and who had taught her the importance of honesty. Her friends and family, learning slowly, carefully, to accept the person she had finally claimed. Gratitude became a quiet rhythm in her life, even in moments of conflict or frustration. Every step forward carried the weight of what she had learned, and the liberation of what she had finally allowed herself to feel. One spring evening, Mira and Elena sat on the balcony, tea steaming in their hands, city lights glittering below. I never imagined life could feel like this, Elena said softly. Mira reached across, tucking a strand of hair behind Elena's ear. It can, she said. When you let it. When you choose it. Elena nodded, heart full. I chose it. I chose you. Mira smiled, and the curve of her lips carried a promise that needed no words. They were not perfect. Life continued to demand patience, courage, and care. But Elena no longer feared those demands. She had chosen truth. Chosen love. Chosen herself. And in choosing, she had discovered the rarest kind of freedom, a life lived fully, openly, and without apology. Together, they leaned into the evening, holding hands and watching the stars ignite one by one, knowing the story of their lives was theirs to write, and that it would endure because it had been chosen, carefully, bravely, and with love.